When I left Connie and her mother at Bramble Cottage, it was quite obvious that I wouldn't be back there for some time, if I was ever back there at all. So they started packing up and getting ready to go back to Scotland and Inveraray. Before they left, Connie went along to Ferry Aviation Works and saw her employer and said, I'm going back to Scotland now, my husband's ship's gone. And of course he didn't like to let her go, apparently, because he told her that the wartime regulations were that people just couldn't walk out of their job when they liked. Connie said that she knew that she wasn't supposed to do that, but she was going to Scotland anyway. And of course she had a little secret which she didn't tell him, and that was that she'd been to a doctor because she hadn't been feeling all that brilliant, and the doctor had made whatever tests she needed to do and said, you're pregnant. And as Connie got out of the waiting room after the doctor's surgery, after she'd got the good news, she met her mother, and her mother had a smile and greeted Connie with the words, I know, you're pregnant. So that was another good reason for going back. Inveraray is a very quiet little place, except for the training activities that go on there. And there wasn't much likelihood of them being bombed or mucked about by the war in any way. An officer on the ship is continually being bombarded by ratings or seamen passing items of information to him. The coxswain might be saying something about the ship that he's steering, or the signalman might bring the results of a signal, some message that's come into the ship. All the time there are ratings coming up to him and saying so-and-so has happened. Maybe an enemy aircraft approaching from such and such a position. So the officer has a stock reply for that. He says, as soon as he's received the message to show that he's understood it, he says, very good. So I got into the habit of saying this, very good. It could be the ship's just been torpedoed or something, but you still say very good because you received the message. And at home, of course, I found that I was still saying it. And Connie would say that Gay's fallen over and hurt her knee. And I'd say, very good. So-and-so's died. Very good. So it's a bit of a trap, that routine naval answer. We had a few people taking passage with us on the way to Gibraltar. The naval chaps amongst them were Fleet Air Arm pilots, because there's quite a large airport at Gibraltar, which in wartime was a Fleet Air Arm base. And there were a couple of army blokes too. We ferried our passengers ashore at Gibraltar and then set sail for the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was fairly clear of hostile action during this time in '43 when we went through. The Italian Navy had been given such a tousing by the British fleet. They just were afraid to risk their ships. They kept in harbour. The British Navy had the advantage of air superiority in the end. Another major advantage was the radar. The Italian Navy had a very inferior radar to the British Navy. The British Navy could fire their big guns from a great distance and not have to visually see the ships at all. They could use their radar to sight their guns and see if they were getting results. So this was a very great advantage and quite unfair, really, as far as fair play would go. I was lucky enough to be traveling on a Italian ship in, must have been in 1945, an Italian warship, and it was such a beautifully made ship and very fast. And I talked to the gunnery officer aboard, and he was saying how hopeless it was trying to fight an enemy that you couldn't see that was firing quite accurately at you and scoring hits on the ships around you. Our journey to Malta was reasonably uneventful. We had the beautiful Mediterranean tranquil sea, lovely sunny days, and we were in a convoy. We had an air escort, which was one American Lightning. The Lightning is a twin fuselage aircraft. It flew very high above us and round in a circle. And I think it must have been there to spot for submarines, probably, because we had one or two aircraft come over, and they didn't drop any bombs on us, but I think they were probably sticky baking and just having a look at the convoy. The Lightning would leave the convoy as soon as the enemy aircraft approached. We knew they were coming, of course. We picked them up on our radar, and we'd be at action stations. And most of the time we spent at action stations after this. We became quite tired and exhausted through doing our normal duties and having action stations thrust upon us, because action stations on a Navy ship is just like the old sailing ship days when they had the cry of all hands on deck. Action stations is all hands on deck, where everyone has a job and a function at action stations, and so there's no time for sleep or anything else. That's all you do. You don't eat. You'd be lucky if you get a cup of coffee or a sandwich or something brought round you if you'd been at action stations for long enough to warrant that. So we had the Lightning with us all the time, all the way to Malta. It just circled all the way around the convoy and disappeared whenever there was enemy aircraft about. As soon as the enemy aircraft had gone, back it would come. There are two reasonably large harbours, one much larger than the other, in Malta. Valletta Harbour is the main harbour, a very large harbour, and all the big ships used to go in there, the battleships and cruisers, or a few destroyers might go in, but the monitors and the aircraft carriers would all be in there. A smaller harbour is Sliema Creek, and that's where we went. We find that within the harbour is an island, and the island is quite large in Sliema Creek. It's called Manol Island. It's so large that it makes the harbour, well, probably gives it the name Creek, because as you come in the entrance to the harbour, there's Manuel Island right in front of you. And you either have to go to the right around Manuel Island or to the left around Manuel Island. And if you went to the right, you'd find on the island the slipways that the major landing craft used. Most of the ships, the destroyers and corvettes and sloops and the landing ship infantry like we were, went to the left around the island. And we would moor stern to the main part of Malta, not to Manuel Island, but to the other side, away from the island. And the ships would be there in rows, stern to. We could put down a gangway, and our stern gangway would reach the shore, and we could walk ashore. And all the way around this anchorage was a bitumen road. We were one of the main roads, went all the way around the edge of the harbour. So with the ships like that, they of course were massive guns. They were all the guns on the destroyers and sloops, corvettes, and of course the LSIs, or landing ship infantry, were all close together. The ships were reasonably close together. You could almost have walked across the ships from one ship to another, maybe 10 or 20 yards between each ship. This was quite good at night when we were being bombed, because we were bombed every night and we were at action stations all the time. And this is why we became so tired, and by the time you did your watch or whatever you had to do, and you'd be called out at night, you'd be wakened by the alarm bells ringing and have to be at your action station for quite a few hours, and get back to bed after that, and then be called out again. I can remember one time that we'd been up and down to action stations so often that I got up and was staggering along the deck heading for my action station, and I met the other blokes coming back. I'd slept through the alarm bell that was action stations, and I was going there on the all clear, and they said, "Don't worry, it's all over, get back to bed." During the night air raids, we had the benefit of a commentary which was broadcast by one of the destroyers, probably the flotilla leader, over the loud hailer system. So it would be quite loud all over the harbour, you'd hear it. This commentary on the planes, long before they arrived. We'd all be at action stations. The flotilla leader, I suppose, was watching it on his radar, and for the benefit of his guns crews and the rest of the ships, so that they would get an early warning of where the planes were coming from. They would give the direction that the planes were circling and then coming in towards Malta, what direction of compass direction it was coming in, so that the gunners would have their guns trained in that area and ready for them. And they would even say, "Here they come now, they're diving," and so quite a few seconds or so before the planes arrived, you know exactly where to be ready to fire the guns. And of course all the guns on the destroyers and our ships and everything, it's a tremendous racket when all these guns are going as hard as they can go. And although it might be frightening to someone if they hadn't experienced it, it's a very comforting sound to someone if you're on a ship that you think might be being attacked.